pull. Break up. Nint the der on ostir elan da in one no sun the nor did the waxen not yet did the circumambit you her arms alone, oh, though there it could tread, the air was dark. All objects, old things strove. Lacked, enlabored after an awakening, was leaning. Embody, my body slipping, embody, my body slipping, down full toward its own secret sermon, secret, rough sermon, a mist, sermon of Grack, and it, sermon, simper. Oh, that I be at rest, then more sure these Elu was shadow, long shall, finding no, but find for they, a bewildered ever, weary of my, that is first, then was ever, for they ever had. Had the wings of a dove, but whether could I fly, oh, and abiding portion, and no ring, deceiving enjoyments, where shall I find real? I wander from mountain, oh, that I could rest for the soul of me, and weary myself dwa. Solar the solar the In profile, finally, leaves in lower left hand, only chinks for the pieces of paper pattern. Walking just below my father's orchard after I religion and the concerns of my soul, my business, religion and the concerns of my soul, my business, prayed for labored after an awakening sense. After I had taken up many concerns of my business, and after I had set to it, and sense of my miserable, with a great deal of concern, sensible, I thought, and negligent, notwithstanding, so old in over the south fence, and notwithstanding to be sensible then now, what made me cast in my mind whether I had not, but considered I was very unable to. I was leaning, one chain's thought I saw, manner that an image of it on my mind as what should, but I attempted to read, but out one chain intercepting and covering I had as lively asable and did not seem to be, had seen it abruptly and so strong that I attempted to look upon it as supernat by a piece of Cicero of imagination, and that kept up I always hoped for. I seemed to be set at great concern with it. It then that the inhabitants were, and it seemed comfort to confusions of worldly affa. Mind in general, though melancholy, thought of the dangers I would. Fear I was not prepared. In small hand on tray, pencil, commonplace. distemper I was seized with it. Why dressed gold, churn, famil, if old, live, eat, bit, olet, and street, and dit, orf, Opening the house door, she stood, hesitating whether set at great distance from this world. It then appeared to me a vain, toilsome. The tants were strangely wandered, lost, and comfort to me that I was so separate to worldly affairs by my present affliction, and although melancholy, was yet in a quiet frame, because I was in. It was not without a deep prepared for death, and did set myself to. Belonged to nobody, as field and etc. The alterations which he produced, the voices of a vast number of beings in mind, and soon carried my ideas much into be very much ravished with it, and sometimes had scarce any definite ideas. I hardly knew sound, or rather felt like a wave in the air, held there by the something delirious and sometimes soft, yet I, degree rational, and consulted with myself about, in my imagination, but it did my Oler place the will from ditch when on sea wrote, and the Romans too. On the other hand, world I used to be very felt soft, or in a sort, Ridley knew who or what I was, and thereby the music, and therefore lost I was, consulted with myself about it, and was ready. Riding, elf not so, the light I itself not so. The light I leaves and covering the pages, pursuing shadows and things that I know are on and toss. The effect silk codes would have on agents in the field. He answered that could hide behind the silk, in common with, or what shall I say to you? If or to me, that I was so separate, Tage, our lives are all exceeding brittle and uncertain. Remember Lot's wife. Whether the new earth but lately drawn world should seem heavenly, either retains still some element in will fail you like a broken tooth, or a foot out of joint. This will follow the moon, whom, dear, etched this by not death, your old, you as a something delirious, and therefore lost. I was to a degree rational, and consulted with myself about it, and concluded it was in my amongst that the very saw there to children. 1379 151 1379 1713 1773. And indeed a sweetness and too loose. But as I grew well, I, actual to concern myself with, to seek a love union with an immortal, out to be Cynthia, a symbol of light and the law, and into ultimate real glacio, stage, the objects gold, the chief happiness and perfect. What shall I say to you? What shall I leave to you? Or what shall I say to you? As it were to the judgment of rivers by the laws of most nations, and by the natural is attributed to the proprieties of their banks, except as the Rhine or the Danube, which seem too large to follow it, to the property of the neighboring fields, yet even considered as the property of that nation through which something while I live that may contribute to cars, bear them such a relation in the fancy, which are made to land bordering upon rivers, follow aliens, provided it be made by what they call alluvion, imperceptibly, which are circumstances that assist conjunction. Considerable portion torn at once from one bank and becomes not his property whose land it falls on till it or till the trees and plants have spread their roots into thought of does not entertain dangerous between the necessity of a separation, possession, and the rules which assign particular persons. The first necessity is obvious, strong, and in. I remember the summer before my sister Jerusha's death, and I was leaning over the south fence and thinking in this manner, that I was never likely to do better, and where should I go, etc. Vale, a field of, direct me home. And when lost, or to riv, direct me home, vale, a field of. Said to itself, not so. The light I've to its judge's face, but not yet had the pen. Only heard as what might the mystery of the original wild, unbounded place, somewhat broken counterpoint. Now we can rest in the absolute can ever be looked here actual infinite of any sort, haunts are being loosened from vocalism and remembering of as yet moonwren hang poised rift and air, nor had red far reaches of land and at or swim flew of things flood flute and as new-made unknown story by the moral alibi, others, not I, are looking. Excuse of others as a mirror, in order to look at conscience, teller, the country people, the sylvan day, glorious. Well, what do we? Surprisingly beautiful and made manifest, and over the surface would erase the letter. From nature, Olden was the without a did the right. Threatening words, tablets, no suppliant. Its judge's face, but not yet had the pin. There was no need at secure from war's alarms. That my spirits were as the sound, or rather to have strong of before. My ideas were of its being other world. I used to be very much, but felt like a wave or friends, and remaining so insensible without one chain of thought, and covering the pages, ravished with it, and sometimes her hands and the air held there by the mute stood string so like, how like of thine selbst gleba savciu all hast read her this held a day or two, and then began to a cloud and glitters for a moment, a cloud and glitters for a moment, wintry cold, that the mother, with pain, with her thimbled in when she always in sight of happiness and never to get to it, but within there is no dead and complete silence, is sitting careless on a granary, off-lifted in light movement by the image also suggesting that the child, same direction in the wind, resembles instincts of the harvester, rises and falls in aid, aside in stillness, twinned flowers on stepping stones, wraps to a complete of the sea rose to behold the oppressions that are done under the sun. End up flay and we glant de long are the eshlay. In chase of happiness, if you lean upon an arm of flesh. Abiding place, but ought not a confederation, changed in fair order, and sing her welcome. She along the me, who come weary and heavy laden. What a bleak account I have drawn up against. Look forward, O my soul. Salutes them all with honors. All the organs consisting of little threads or nerves, by the way, as frequently happiness. Some parenthesis which darkens the sense. Haughtiness is always little violence. In chase of happiness, if you lean upon an arm of flesh. In case of happiness, if you lean upon an arm of flesh. In chase of happiness, if you lean upon an arm of flesh. And in death and only hope is from this world. Is not for the clay to say to the potter, why have you the poor body of one and the marks of an. sure.
Yes, so we're recording this, so if you have a question and you could speak into the microphone, I'd be glad to bring it to you. I think I want to hear you say something about this collaboration, because it sounds very different to me from the other two. So maybe if you could just say a few words about that, would that be all right?
Yeah. Well, I think that we in the other two that we've gradually, you can explain this more than me in a way, but I think we've gradually moved away from a kind of standard, a set narrative into a kind of, into something much more fractured and abstract. And I think that collaborating with David has, for me, although in a way we start with a text of mine, my method, my way of writing or thinking what a text might do has developed and changed by my working with David, partly by music that he has brought to my attention and made me aware of, but also the sense that my words could be further broken apart into a kind of sound that is itself a sort of music, but that still does have some narrative. I mean, to me, there's a clear narrative. So it does have a narrative flow, and I'm quite scared about presenting something to you that seems to have done away with the kind of thing the narrative that I'm used to. But I also feel that this Hannah Edwards, the person whose text that basically I have collaged here, but it isn't only her text, it's my text, it's other text, but I thought I was creating something visually on the page, but the sense that it is so powerfully acoustic stunned me, actually. And there was a way I simply had to read it. But then working with David has sort of it's exaggerated or added to the way that I might feel of echoing words, and it's just enriched the path that I took. But I have to say that I strangely feel that the power of this Hannah Edwards voice, when I listen to our CD, it's like she broke through somewhere, that this isn't mine, that this somehow has been given to me in some way. But I wouldn't be at this extreme if I hadn't been working in collaboration with David. So now you say what you about it.
I was just going to say that the previous piece that we did was entitled Soul's the Labadee Tract, and that was the first piece that we had done that was of a new poem of yours that hadn't yet been published at that time. And that was a very satisfying way to move, right? To be working with your newest piece of writing. And so a few years ago, a couple of years before we started working on this piece, Susan sent me the manuscript of Frolic Architecture, and she said, I hope you enjoy it. It's an unperformable poem, which, you know, I think was evidence of your interest in performing it, and I had a sense that you would find a way to perform it, and sure enough, you did. It performs
itself.
Right.
That's the weird thing.
Right. What this has in common with the other collaborations that we've done is that the working method, at least at the beginning, was the same, which is that I recorded Susan reading the poem, and in preparing to work on a piece such as this, I familiarize myself as best I can with the text, and then once there's a recorded version of Susan reading the poem, that's the text, that's the material, and I really throw away the text, and I'm just working with the sound of Susan's voice and the rhythms of the reading. And what I did with this initially was just to further fragment the already fragmentary performance, the splittings of words, and just gathered a collection, a kind of gamut of consonant sounds and vowel sounds, and with the idea of really, collaborating in the medium of recorded language, such that for a long while I thought that my only collaboration was going to be further editings of recordings of your voice. I mean, there were other elements eventually added to it, but for a long while I really thought that for me, the most exciting part of the collaboration was in matching your fragmentation to my fragmentation.
Yes, Lisa.
Listening to you made me so anxious, Susan.
Oh,
it was so beautiful, so really, really beautiful. And I was trying to figure out why I was so anxious listening to these parts of words. And it felt to me somehow that whole words, denotative words, don't let us down, don't put us at risk as much. There it is, you say it, it's over. Yeah. And there's something about these fractured words of yours that seem to me so exacting to perform and make the performance of speech bring into a kind of acute and anxious the way in which speech is so itself so anxious, and maybe by writing it down it becomes I don't know, but I just wonder if you could say anything about. You don't have to talk about how anxious you were or how anxious you weren't, but...
Well, I think that strangely, there's an extraordinary peace. It might be anxious, but just some of the words are just so beautiful. And it does have to do with the thing that really, in a way, working on Dickinson's late manuscripts and fragments led me into a
but
thing.
You're saying visually beautiful. On the page,
see, my visual and acoustic to me, that's the great mystery, that they are one thing, and that every mark down on a page is an acoustic mark. Right. And the shape, the way that these visually look on the page, cannot be separated from the acoustic, to me, power, and in even beauty. So in the anxiety, there is also a sense of peace. I can't. It's hard to describe. But I've been reading. William Carlos Williams Patterson recently and working on a manuscript idea, and it seems to me in some way that finally that I'm working at a post-epic, anti-epic, that I love Patterson. I love it for its conflict and its cut up, but there's parts of it I loathe. Yeah. And that sort of domineering epic tone, and we've got here it's like this is coming out of the fracturing of the idea of epic, but there is epic somewhere in there, that it's dealing with the deep past or the history of America or whatever. Anyway, so that
thank you.
Thank you. It's a new kind of experience for me. One question I had, there was one group of words were that there is no dead or complete silence. And that sort of got me exploring a little in my thoughts. And I guess it was that maybe if there's a way of enhancing what one can experience in silence, there has to be a little contrast. And I wondered if that was part of your experience in creating this.
Do you want to say
I mean, for me, the only silences that I really experience are in the very beginning of the piece that separate the fragments and create a kind of familiarity with the fragment as the bass line. When I hear silence, I think of John Cage's sense of silence as unintended or uncomposed or unauthored sound. It's just what we pay attention to. And there is a certain quality of scattering in the use of the cut-up elements in here, and then there's a certain quality of composing the fragments, the arrangement of the fragments that's created through scattering. So I guess my experience of silence in it doesn't have to do with this Cagean sense of silence as unintended sound or merely ambient sound. I don't know. I guess I'm focused more on the acoustic volume of a speaking voice as kind of the baseline for the piece, as opposed to the horizon of silence for me being the baseline of the work.
Hi. I was thinking when I was listening about medieval prayer practices and Alleluia, which doesn't mean anything. It's just syllables strung together that are part of the Psalms, and that in the context of prayer, the sounds would be elongated or shortened or woven in among other sounds that were parts of words or whole words, depending on particular contexts and particular places in the liturgy. And that's what I heard when I was hearing you. I was hearing the breaking up of words into sounds less fluid, more consonants, different kinds of sounds where the fragmentation may be more immediate. And yet at the same time, there was a kind of peace or a kind of beauty or a kind of, I almost want to say praise. And I wonder to what extent that's coming through Hannah Edwards' text, where she's talking about the recitation of the psalm. She's talking about engaging in the hymnic and the kind of prayer practices of Protestant Christianity. I guess my question to you is whether that feels overly pious or problematic as a reading, or whether that has any resonances in relationship to the way both of you are thinking about the work that you're doing in relationship to text, other texts, your own music.
Well, when I saw in looking at all these Edwards manuscripts, the first thing that struck me was how Edwards, well, I have it in my book, but they endlessly, he writes on fragments of, like fan paper his wife and daughters used for making fans, on other books, fills in margins. It's like he can't stop doing this on the page, any page. And the paper begins to look much more like material. And the women's in the Edwards manuscript, highly educated women in this family are basically a sheet the mother made, a little scrap of the wedding dress. They are material. But suddenly, out of this folder came these private thoughts. Part of it being a journal that she had when she was delirious. And she achieved this mystical state where she heard music. This is this, severely Puritan woman. And she was in seventh heaven, and the music was just, and then she came back to the real world. And so but what struck me and got me started was the first word. No title, it's like Dickinson's manuscript books, no title, no, just O-H, exclamation, that I had wings of a dove. So I was just like, oh my God, Henry James, oh, that I had the wings of the dove, oh, give me the psalm. You know, the psalm, the whole, it came, the bolt came from, oh, that I had the wings of a dove, which was the first line. It was the line, that beautiful line from the psalm. And then immediately, of course, I could go on, I won't, about the wings of the dove and Henry James. But it just grabbed me. And so what grabbed me was a psalm. I mean, the psalm, and the language being this Protestant, New England, Puritan, which everybody's so used to saying the Puritans are just hopelessly austere, and they're not. They're wildly not austere when they and austere. They're everything. So I think there's definitely some profound connection with the Bible and King James version. You'd have to sort of say a certain version of the Bible, and that it's there in her language. No matter how you're going to cut it up, there it is. Just as it is in early American captivity narratives that I've always been interested in. And anyway.
I guess this sort of builds off the last question, more of a question for David. I think I read in the liner notes of the recording that you used a Hammond organ as one of the sound sources. And sort of thinking in terms of the liturgical, was that a purposeful choice? Or was that something that you were thinking of? How do you, because Souls of the Labadee tract has the mouth organ as sort of the principal instrument. And this uses the Hammond organ. Are you honing on a specific voice? Does it have some sort of idiomatic relation to the text? Is that something that you consider? And then, Susan, is that something that you discuss when that portion comes into the part of the process?
Well, Souls of the Labadee tract was, you answer first, but it was amazing.
Souls of the Labadee tract has two source instruments. One is a reed organ, a Laotian reed organ, and the other is a early synthesizer. So it has one electronic source and one acoustic source, which to me sort of added up to a pipe organ, you know, in the way that, yeah. And I mean, the virtue for this piece of the Hammond organ is that you can select the overtone ratios in it, and there's something undeniably churchy about it. There's no question about that. But the technique that's peculiar to this piece with the Hammond organ is that I recorded each pitch individually so that I could draw volume contours for each note in a chord. So the chord is not throbbing as a chord. It's, you know, that there's a movement and volume of each individual note in the chord that should be slightly hallucinatory, I think.
We did it at one point at Chicago, in that church, in the Gothic chapel, and it was really, it was as though, wasn't it? That was incredible. I mean,
if we do say so ourselves.
No, but it was just weird. It just was like, oh my God, this is too weird. This is really, I'm actually, I believe in poetry as my religion. I'm a secular person, I get, but I do have I mean, I feel that poetry is a calling, and so it's, I don't know what to say.
The question makes me think, we were talking over lunch and you were talking about your interest in Stevens.
Yeah.
And I recalled what you said.
What?
Well, talking about Stevens' late work in particular as constituting almost a form of prayer.
It is a form of prayer to me. He's up there with the Bible, the Psalm, comfort. So the thing about nervousness and late work, which obviously my work is late, and the Psalms, the sense of, I mean, the River of Rivers in Connecticut, it's just, I just adore that poem, and I'm trying to figure out how it runs through all the late poems. But just reading Stevens gives me the most extraordinary comfort. and I feel weirdly traitorous in having gone over to Williams right now, but it's, anyway.
And this might sound like a very basic question, but I'm sort of curious to hear how you'll address it. But I noticed that in your readings, that enjambment seems to occur in places where, even where, not just where texts are sort of placed and juxtaposed together, but also where actual rips seem to be occurring, or else where words seem to be half erased or not present. And so I wanted to hear how you see the collage work that you do in frolic architecture addressing the conventions of line breaks and enjambment in poetry. And then I had another question also. I just wanted to hear, wanted to also ask about why you choose to sing at a certain moment.
Oh, at that point?
Yeah.
That's a hymn, actually, I sing, Abide With Me. I don't know why I chose to sing, except no, I can't explain. But enjambment, I of course, I can't explain, but I love enjambment. I mean, it's one thing I love in Stevens. I absolutely love his use of enjambment in his, now in Midsummer Come and All Fools Slaughtered and Spring's Infuriations. And the way a line, you think it stopped and it picks up, and you know, it just, I think that's the most thrilling thing. But on the other hand, this isn't in any way possibly, you know what I mean? This is so different. This is so, but I did, I recently, this is how I recently saw that the Neither with Morton Feldman's, the Beckett script called Neither, where the singer, it was a performance in New York with Morton Feldman's his music, but you could explain it better. I don't know, actually, I experienced it. I can't explain how he did it, but the singer, finally, there's a Beckett text that's so spare, there's like 15 lines, and it's all around the word neither. And it's just a woman, a soprano, or is she a soprano? Or, yeah, soprano, on the stage singing no words, just, there are the words, you could see the words going, but you'd stop paying attention to that. It was just the absolute minimalism of the Feldman music and this singing, I mean this just without words. The final thing, but sound. It was beautiful sound. It was a musical voice singing no words. And to me, that, the ultimate thing, that's it. I mean, you know, so this is, but you can't go that far in poetry because you're dealing with words. I mean, but you need, but this to me is not going quite that far. But that would be the next, or coming from a space that's absolutely silent. But how could, I can't explain enjambment, but it's terribly important in terms of cut, paste, don't stop and continue. Neither one thing or the other. But it would be sound, fundamentally, just a cry.
Thank you. It's intriguing to hear the most recent things you were saying about late Stevens, and I'm thinking, okay, this is 60 years approximately ago, and I'm trying to get at the nature of the experience that I have while reading the Stevens, and the nature of the experience that I have while being exposed to this performance. And what I'm groping for, since I have no idée fixe on this at all, is how much the experience is determined by the knowledge that the text in this case is primarily drawn from Hannah Edwards. And yes, some splicings in. I hear bits of Keats. I hear.
It was a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I hear Autumn. I hear the Psalms. Yeah. And the experience of fracturing and the almost whispering-like debris field that has an effect of resonance, certainly does, seems to me something that I wanted to work with a little in this question, because I was wondering whether you felt that had you not been working with a source text or source texts, and that the acoustic experiential value of the language would have been different to you. In other words, if you had just sat in a room and started as if you were Stevens writing out The River of Rivers or Of Mere Being or any of his great late poems, do you think that it's almost as if he's hearing them in a nearer part of the sensorium? I'm invoking this concept of distance because there is a certain distance between not just the diction of Hannah Edwards, but our sense of her being dead and the past and that whole ambience. And I'm trying to get at a feeling of whether you feel that this kind of work could be actually done with a different proportion of source text to, let's call it, original text. And this brings up the question of the lyric, because you mentioned writing a kind of anti-epic, and I'm wondering whether you're also subverting lyric to the same degree, or whether you're trying to recuperate notions of the lyric, in which case I come back to this question of the relation to the source.
I would think I'm actually very deeply trying to recuperate the lyric, or a sense of a kind of romanticism that I'm trying to recuperate somewhere. I'm trying to recuperate it, very, very much so. But I could not repeat this experience. This experience happened to me. I can't describe. It's really the Edwards manuscripts are. If you could see them, they're just unbelievable. They're overwhelming. And somehow I meant to be writing something about Jonathan Edwards, but I discovered this. Hannah leapt up. But I think I've always, and I think it's there in Stevens too, actually, a Protestant. There's some kind of, well, the way he turns back to his Pennsylvania childhood, and you always hear his mother read him the Bible there's something in the ear that is fundamentally American Protestant. I can't, what I'm trying to get at? I don't know, but it is in the structure of the words and the language and the lyric. The lyric of the King James, if someone rearranges "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want me," and makes it a new translation and all the politically correct, I can't stand it. I have to have the King James Version. But that's me. But I think it was also Steve. I don't know but I suspect that or Eliot. You can't do away with that fundamental, which is lyric to me. That's what lyric is. I don't know. That's what I think anyway.
Thank you. I'm a member of Professor Sandler's freshman seminar, and we, as a class, several of us, attempted to read parts of Frolic architecture, myself included. Yeah. And I don't know, I found it deliciously bewildering. Yeah. And I was wondering, how do you feel? Do you feel transformed when you read, when you perform this piece? This is a question for both of you. How does it change you? I know you mentioned listening to the recording, and feeling like Hannah Edwards came forth.
Yeah.
Is there something you have decided to do to make that come forth, or did it just happen?
It just happened. I can't tell you how, but first of all, this was made as a fine press artist book. First of all, I made this not in the New Directions one you see, but in for 24 editions, hand-pressed, very beautiful paper. It was a visual, I thought it was visual. But no, I mean, every time I read it, I'm like ordered. I mean, it's like I have to read it this way. And it becomes a very moving thing that has nothing to do with me reading something that I'm saying, oh, Susan, you wrote this line, this is really good. It's more, it's like, it's just something there. I have never felt this way so strongly about any other work of mine that I've ever done, that this thing is the thing about the meeting of the acoustic and the visual in unbreakable, and the past and the present. I mean, no, and of course I know that nobody else is going to read it like this. And that's so what? In the end, so what? This is what I have to do, or the way it's done, and it would never have been done to this extent had I not been working and collaborating. If I hadn't, I mean, I think he's pushed my work in some way.
I would just add to that, one of the real pleasures for me in working with Susan is just this opportunity to listen to her read a given work 20 times, 30 times, 40 times. It really, I mean, nothing in my adulthood or my experience of reading poetry is anything remotely similar to this, and it's been a fascinating process of, it's just I have an evolving relation to these poems by listening to so many different iterations. And it's an extraordinary experience that's so different from my experience of reading.
I want to thank people for the quality of the questions, and also I was very aware of the quality of the listening in the room. Which I
yes, just thank you so much. It's really wonderful.
We do have